If you're anything like me, you're always hunting for stories that make your skin crawl, in the best way. That's why I have to tell you about Grimly. Every week, they dig into the unholy, the unsolved, and the deeply unsettling. From chilling true crime to eerie tales that blur the line between fact and folklore. The production is hauntingly good, the storytelling, absolutely captivating. It's the kind of podcast that stays with you long after you finish listening. So if you're ready to explore the darker side of history and humanity, subscribe to Grimly wherever you get your podcasts. Just don't say I didn't warn you.
Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Down the Crooked Path is researched and recorded in Niagara Falls, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Attawandaron, and the Mississauga of Credit First. This land has been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and we recognize their enduring connection. We are grateful to share these stories on their lands that carry their histories, and we encourage our listeners to reflect on the past, present, and future of the land they call home. Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian Creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
Canada is a land of jagged coastlines, whispering forests, and endless sky. A place that hums with nature and echoes with stories. And woven into that landscape is a pulse of creativity. From Inuit sculptures in the north to Montreal's jazz clubs and Vancouver's street murals, this country holds a quiet richness of art and culture. But sometimes, the artist becomes as mysterious as the work they leave behind. Tonight we travel back to the early 20th century, deep into the pine-lined edges of Algonquin Park. Among the loons, the lakes, and the silence, a painter found inspiration, and then he vanished. Tom Thomson was never a household name in his own lifetime, but his brushstrokes shaped a movement, and his death became one of Canada's greatest unsolved mysteries. Some say it was an accident, others whisper of murder, and then there are those who believe that he never really left those woods at all. In the story of Canadian art, few names echo louder than the Group of Seven. They weren't just painters, they were a movement, a vision. A declaration that Canada's wilderness deserved its own voice on the canvas. Before them, most Canadian artists borrowed from European traditions. Manicured gardens, mannerly portraits, landscapes that felt more like British countryside than boreal wild. But the Group of Seven looked outward and inward and saw something different. They saw vastness, ruggedness, silence, majesty, and they felt called to capture it. Formed in 1920, the Group of Seven believed that true Canadian identity was rooted in the land itself. They ventured into the forest, climbed the Laurentians, paddled icy rivers. Their art didn't smooth the edges, it celebrated them. Bold brushwork, unapologetic color, raw nature, rhythm. It wasn't just painting, it was revolution. And while their official roster changed over time, the spirit remained. A reverence for the landscape and a desire to show the soul of Canada, not from the city out, but the wilderness in. What makes their legacy remarkable is how enduring it is. Their paintings hang in national galleries, yes, but more than that, they changed how Canadians see their country. Not as something to conquer, but something to belong to. And in the shadows of this famous group was a man whose name wasn't a part of the collective, but whose vision helped birthed it all. Tom Thomson. His is a story of a different kind, one where art meets wildness and something or someone goes missing. Tom Thomson was born August 5, 1877, in the small town of Claremont, the sixth of 10 children of a Scottish-Canadian farming family. When he was just a baby, the family moved to Leith, near Owen Sound, where he grew up surrounded by forest, field, and the cold, clear waters of the Georgian Bay. It was a rugged rural upbringing, one that would shape his eye and spirit for the rest of his life. He wasn't a prodigy. In fact, he didn't show any particular artistic brilliance as a child, but he loved the outdoors. He fished, hiked, and wandered into the woods with a naturalist's curiosity. He also had a flair for music. He played the mandolin and sang in church choir, and a quiet, introspective nature that made him both observant and hard to pin down. Thomson's early adult life was restless. He tried his hands at a few different trades, apprenticed at a foundry, studied business, even moved to Seattle to work at a commercial design. It was there, working as a pen artist and engraver, that he began to develop the skills that would later shape his painting. Clean lines, bold compositions, and a love of expressive form. But it wasn't until he returned to Toronto and joined the design firm Grip Limited that things began to shift. Surrounded by other artists, many of whom would later form the Group of Seven, Thomson was encouraged to take his sketching more seriously. He had begun venturing out of the city on weekends, painting the Ontario countryside with increasing passion and confidence. Then, in 1912, he made his first trip to Algonquin Park. That trip changed everything. The wilderness wasn't just scenery to Thomson, it was a calling. He returned again and again, eventually spending most of his time there, working as a guide, a fire ranger, and a painter. His technique evolved rapidly. He painted on small wooden panels, often outdoors, capturing the fleeting moods of the forest with thick, expressive brushstrokes and a palette that pulsed with life. By the time he reached his late 30s, he had created hundreds of sketches and dozens of finished canvases, works that would later become icons of Canadian art: the Jack Pine, the Wind West, Northern River, paintings that didn't just show the land, they felt like it. But just as his artistic voice was reaching its peak, Tom Thomson vanished. And this is where the story turns. By the summer of 1917, Tom Thomson had become a familiar figure in the Algonquin Park. He was no longer just a visitor, he was part of the landscape. The locals knew him as a quiet, solitary man who painted by day and paddled by night. That year, he had returned to the park early in April to catch the last of the snowmelt and the first blush of spring. He spent his days sketching, guiding, and fishing, but by July, something had shifted. Thomson was staying near Canoe Lake, renting a room from the Mowat Lodge, a rustic boarding house run by Shannon and Annie Fraser. The lodge was a hub for artists, guides, and park workers, a place where stories were swapped over whiskey and the line between solitude and society were blurred. Thomson was a regular there, often sleeping in a tent nearby but taking meals with the Frasers. He was close to them, maybe too close. On the morning of Sunday, July 8, 1917, Tom Thomson was seen walking with Shannon Fraser, the proprietor of the Mowat Lodge, towards Joe Lake Dam. It was a warm, quiet day in Algonquin Park, and Thomson, an experienced outdoorsman, was headed out alone on his canoe, likely to fish or sketch or both. According to the park ranger Mark Robinson, who kept a meticulous diary, Thomson left the Fraser's dock around 12:30 that afternoon, paddling towards T Dam or West Lake. That was the last confirmed sighting of him alive. Later that same afternoon, his gray canoe was spotted drifting, overturned in the waters of Canoe Lake. It was seen by Martin Bletcher Jr., a fellow lodger at the Mowat Lodge, but, and this is where the silence begins, Bletcher didn't report the sighting until the following day. Why the delay? No one knows for certain. Some say he assumed Thomson had simply capsized and swum to shore. Others suggest he didn't want to get involved. But by the time the alarm was raised, Tom Thomson had been missing for nearly 24 hours. A search began. Locals, park staff, they all combed the shorelines. The overturned canoe was recovered, and inside were a few of Thomson's belongings: a gallon of maple syrup, a jar of jam, and a rubber sheet. But there was no sign of the man himself. For 8 days, the lake held its secret. Then, on Monday, July 16th, Thomson's body surfaced. It was found floating in Canoe Lake, not far from where the canoe had been discovered. His watch had stopped at 12:14, and there was a 4-inch bruise on his right temple. More disturbingly, fishing line was wrapped around his one ankle, a detail that would later become a point of contention. The body was examined by Dr. George W. Howland, a local physician. He ruled the cause of death as drowning, and the coroner, Dr. Arthur Rainey, supported that conclusion. The bruise, they said, could have come from a rock. The fishing line, not officially addressed in the report, but remembered later by Mark Robinson, who noted it in his personal record. The day after his body was found, Tom Thomson was buried in a simple grave near the lake, a quiet interment at the Mowat Cemetery, just up the hill from Canoe Lake, marked by a wooden cross and the presence of a few locals. No ceremony, no family, just the forest, the water, and the weight of unanswered questions. The official story was closed, but the details, the delay in reporting the bruise, the fishing line, the silence, they left a trail of questions that would never quite fade. 2 days later, Thomson's older brother George arrived. He insisted that the body be exhumed and returned to the family plot in Leith, Ontario, near Owen Sound. The authorities complied. The remains were reportedly placed in a zinc-lined coffin, transported by train, and reburied in Leith on July 21st, 1917. At this point, obscurity arises, as there is disagreement regarding whether the body ever departed from Canoe Lake. In 1956, nearly 40 years later, a group of amateur investigators, including author William T. Little, returned to the original burial site. They dug just north of the 2 known graves in Mowat Cemetery, and what they found was a human skeleton, buried in a rough wooden box. The remains were intact, the grave was undisturbed, and it was exactly where Park Ranger Mark Robinson had said Thomson was buried in 1917. The Ontario government at the time claimed the bones belonged to an Indigenous man, but others weren't so sure. In the decades that followed, forensic anthropologists re-examined the evidence. The skull was Caucasian, middle-aged, and male, consistent with Thomson. A photogrammetric analysis even suggested that the skulls featured matched Thomson's known photographs. The case was officially closed. The coroner's report was brief: a bruise on the temple, water in the lungs, cause of death drowning, end of story. But almost immediately, whispers began to ripple through the pines.
Once upon a time, in the land of everyday moments, there lived a sprinkle of magic called icing sugar photography. From sticky cake smash smiles to wind-swept yes moments, they capture the sugar sweet, the beautifully messy, and everything in between. Whether you're a blushing bride or a blooming family, or just want to freeze time for a second, icing sugar photography is your fairy god lens. Visit icingsugarphotography.com and follow along on Instagram at icingsugarphoto. Let your story sparkle, because life is sweet and memories should be too. For your next obsession, the Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective podcasts today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you.
Tom Thomson was an experienced outdoorsman. He knew Canoe Lake like the back of his hand. The weather that day was calm, and his canoe was found intact, not smashed or splintered. And then there was the bruise on his head, the fishing line wrapped around his ankle, and the delay in reporting his overturned canoe. None of it sat right. And so the theories began. Some believe that Tom was killed, struck during a confrontation and dumped in the lake. The most commonly named suspect? Martin Blecher Jr., a German-American lodger at Mowat Lodge. He and Tom were known to argue, possibly over politics, possibly over a woman. Some say Winifred or Winnie Traynor, a local woman rumored to be engaged to Tom, or even pregnant. Others point to Shannon Fraser, the lodge owner, who allegedly owed Tom money. Could a drunken fight have turned deadly? And then there's the fishing line. Was it a sign of foul play? Was it possible that his legs had been bound at some point? Maybe it was used to weigh him down. And then something snagged on the line, released his body, and that's why it wasn't found for 8 days. Another theory suggests that Tom took his own life, that the pressures of his personal life, strained relationships, and financial insecurity, or the rumored pregnancy, became too much. But those who knew him described him as hopeful, even excited about future painting trips. And his final letters, they were full of plans. In this theory, the fishing line is kind of hard to explain as well. And then there's the simplest theory, that Tom simply slipped. Maybe he stood to relieve himself, lost his balance, hit his head, and fell in. The bruise, the line, the silence, it can all be explained by bad luck. But even this theory has holes. Why didn't he just swim to shore? Why didn't his body surface sooner? And why did his watch stop at 12:14? Some believe the truth was known, but buried, that local authorities rushed the burial, that witnesses were pressured, and that the body never actually left Canoe Lake. The 1956 discovery of a skeleton near the original grave only deepens the mystery. Was Tom ever reburied in Leith? Or is he still there beneath the pines? And if he is still there, why lie about it? Even after the inquest was closed, the grave was filled. Tom Thomson never truly left Canoe Lake. His body may have vanished beneath the surface, but his presence, his essence, seems to have soaked into the trees, the water, and the silence itself. For over a century, campers, rangers, and canoeists have all whispered stories of strange encounters in the park. Not just eerie feelings or flickers of imagination, but vivid, visceral moments that defy explanation. They speak of a lone canoe gliding silently across the lake at dawn, its silhouette barely visible in the rising mist. The figure inside paddles with a steady rhythm, never looking up, never making a sound. And when curious onlookers try to approach, the canoe simply vanishes. No splash, no ripple, just gone. Others have reported seeing a man kneeling at the bottom of the shoreline, sketching furiously as the sun dips low. His form is indistinct, as if made of smoke or memory. Some say he wears a yellow shirt. Others recall a wide-brimmed hat. But all agree, when they blink, he's no longer there. Just the wind in the trees and the faint scent of linseed oil on the air. And there are sounds, too. Brushstrokes on canvas, though no one is painting. The tapping of a paddle against wood, although no canoe is near. Disembodied voices murmuring in the underbush. A low hum like a tune half remembered. Some say it's the forest remembering. Others believe it's Tom, still painting, still watching, still waiting. Local First Nation stories speak of a spirit that dwells in the land, the watcher of the water, guardians of the wild. In some tellings, Thomson's spirit has become one of them, not trapped, but transformed. A presence that protects the park, that warns those who don't respect it, that guide those who lose their way. His death, they say, was not an ending, but a passage that the land claimed, and in return, he became a part of it. There are even stories of direct encounters. One tale passed down through generations tells of a paddler who saw a man in a gray canoe appear beside him in the fog. The man said nothing, only stared at him with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the forest. And then he was gone. Another account published in the Macleans in the 1970s describes a camper who heard a voice warning him of danger, only to discover later that his brother had nearly drowned that same morning. The voice, he swore, belonged to Tom Thomson. In 1980, an artist named Doug Dunfer claimed to have captured the ghost on film. He was photographing the lake at dawn when a figure in a canoe emerged from the fog. He snapped the shutter instinctively. When the film was developed, the image showed a shadowy man in a canoe, his features blurred but his presence undeniable. Years later, a stranger bought the painting inspired by that photo because he, too, had seen the same man in the same place, under the same mist. And so the stories continue, not just as folklore, but as living memory. They share a knowing among those who have spent time in the park, a sense that something or someone is still out there. Because maybe Tom Thomson didn't disappear. Maybe he dissolved into the land he loved, into the wind that bends the pines, into the water that mirrors the sky, into the silence that speaks louder than words. It's been more than a century since Tom Thomson vanished into Canoe Lake, but somehow he never truly died. His story, part tragedy, part legend, continues to echo through the pine-lined forests of Algonquin and far beyond. Maybe it's the wilderness itself that's kept us so captivated. A rugged, unknowable landscape, indifferent to man, and yet magnetic to those who are seeking truth and beauty. Maybe it's the romance of an artist alone in nature, chasing fleeting light with oil and brush, chasing the meaning of silence. Or maybe it's the lingering fog of the unknown, the bruise, the fishing line, the silence, the grave that may or may not hold him. So if you ever find yourself on Canoe Lake at dawn, and the mist curls just right, and the air feels thick with something unsaid, listen, look carefully. You may catch a flicker of yellow, the dip of a paddle, the hush of a brush across canvas. 'Cause death didn't erase Tom Thomson. So as we speak, not just as curious listeners, but as keepers of the story, is it grief that binds him to this place? Or devotion? Is Tom Thomson still there because we can't let go? Or because he never wanted to leave?
That was an eerie journey down the crooked path with Amanda. How cool was that? If you loved it, don't forget to follow Down the Crooked Path on Instagram and TikTok. Amanda shares some really fun interactive content over there, and trust me, it gets even creepier. Down the Crooked Path is our sister podcast, and you can catch new episodes every Thursday wherever you get your podcasts. So if you're into the paranormal, folklore, and strange little corners of the world, we've got you covered.